Okay, we're recording this class now. So I've been talking for a tiny bit, but just basic admin chatty stuff. All right, so what are we going to do expectation-wise today? What I want to do, because we got 2 classes left, what I want to do today is take a moment and let's get in and sculpt something that next week we can export to some program. Whichever one ends up seeming like it's the best idea, but we'll do that next week. So this week is really kind of like the practicum of practicums. Like, we're going to get in and sculpt. That's why there's kind of a base mesh here. Hold on one sec. The system is giving me a warning. Change the color. Okay, can you guys still see my screen? I just had to do a system refresh. Yeah, great. Okay, so we're going to sculpt today, and then we're going to kind of go through the thinking process, all the stuff that we would need to do to create a model. Let's say set this to, there we go. And then next week we're going to export it. So what I want to do is walk you through a lot of the thinking process. Now that you have gone and learned about a lot of the features, I want to walk you through thinking process, a little bit of the psychology, and all of that. The psychology is relevant because ZBrush is designed to be an artist tool, and so we kind of have to be mindful, you know, some of the artist personalities or ways in which we learn. So we'll just chat about that a little bit. All right, let me look into the questions. I've got only 3, I think. Not 2. Frederick, oh yeah, we'll definitely cover Keyshot Bridge. That'll be a mandatory. If not, I mean, at the very least, master classes will go over that because I'm sure that's going to be quite valuable. Banya's got a few questions. Can we delete a mesh in the insert mesh brush after we created it? How to unclip surface after we used clip brush? Unclip surface after and undo doesn't work. And Meets Myers. Yeah, Meets Myers is going to come back. We're not sure if it's in an on-demand or if it's through a masterclass. But Meets is coming back. So can we delete a mesh in an insert mesh brush after we've created that? Any thoughts, guys? Can we come into one of these brushes, M, and delete, you know, one of these things? Anybody know? There might be a way. I am drawing a blank right now, unless one of you guys know. So let me get back to you. If it was, it would probably be somewhere right here in the modifiers. Some kind of easy process, but I'd be inclined to think that they don't have a way for that. So Benya, let me get back to you on that. Let me turn my air conditioning on. And let's get to sculpting if there's nothing else. All right, we want to talk the sculpting processes, workflows, and we're going to do an orc. I don't do orcs often. But it'll give us a lot of room to start to experiment with some of the different features inside of ZBrush and also the approaches. So let's lay out our map real quick for the types of approaches. Remember, early on I spoke to you about this particular axis where artists like to work loose and then they like to work in a controlled fashion, right? We have to sculpt soft forms and we have to sculpt hard forms. So that's just one real simple way to break down features into, you know, what they're best for, both in our temperament and in the actual application of it. So the clay brush we know is a loose, soft form brush. But we can also make the clay brush, fairly useful for hard surface stuff. We can also use other brushes entirely for hard surface. What is a good hard surface brush? Anybody want to take a guess? Or at this point we should know? Good hard surface brush. Trim Dynamic, yeah. My favorite is H Polish. That's a really good hard surface brush, and it's a very loose brush. It's not controlled. The brush is handled loosely, and it takes care of the control. I would actually say H Polish is kind of an advancement on Trim Dynamic. That's the next evolution of a lot of what we want Trim Dynamic to do. So clay is soft. H Polish, Trim Dynamic tends to work well for hard. And then there are features that are either loose or controlled. We know that masks are really both. Masks are usually loosely applied and they run the spectrum of hard and soft. But let's say panel loops is down here. It's a controlled tool, not a lot of freehand behavior there, not in the panel loops phase of it, and it's primarily for hard surface stuff. So what you'll see, and especially with this summit, what you see ZBrush doing, or Pixelogic I should say, what you see them doing is taking, starting to move from this soft forms up here. So this is where ZBrush 2 was, and they owned this loose and soft market. They were the only ones doing it. They're moving down here into controlled hard surface. All of the stuff that they're doing right now is largely hard surface. Okay, but in typical, typical Ofer fashion, Ofer Alon, it's coming from him. He's the leader of that pack. In typical Ofer fashion, he's not using any tools that were invented before, or at least were developed before, in pure form. He's not using extrude in the way that it's done before. He's not using edge loops in the way that they were done before. He is attempting to build an entirely new feature set that will last for the next 10 to 15 years, if we can get there. He's definitely thinking long term, and so the new hard surface stuff will generally be newer ways of looking at all of the stuff that's been done before by Maya, Max, Softimage, rest in peace, and all of that stuff. So just this idea. But what we're going to focus on today is not just really these feature sets, but what I really want to focus on is this, this movement of loose and controlled. This is what I want to talk about today, because this provides a really good framework for understanding, one, why ZBrush focuses on the tools that they do, but then starting to internalize that and starting to say, why am I focused? Why am I, Ryan Kingsline, focused on this tool? Why am I doing it this way? Why am I doing it that way? If I can internalize some of those decision makings with you, then you're going to be in a better position when you're teaching somebody or talking to somebody else. You'll be in a better position to explain why or how they personally can use ZBrush. For example, a lot of times when people start using ZBrush at the beginning, they get very analytical about, let's just say, they might get analytical about the placement of an ear, and they want it to be at exactly halfway. And in the process of sculpting or starting to use ZBrush, you know, they're working with this ear, and you know, they got to move brush, but they don't really want, you know, they want precision. So then they might come over and they might use this, and they're like, okay, I just want it over 1 centimeter. But there's no centimeters, there's nothing like that inside of ZBrush. So they end up fighting it a lot in the beginning, which is natural and fine. But we have to learn how to take that mindset and start to transition it to, one, how ZBrush thinks, and two, how important is it for you to get that 1 centimeter right? Because that 1 centimeter is going to totally interrupt your creative pattern, and ZBrush is not built for it. So we got to find a way that our creative pattern works within ZBrush. Preacher, did you see last night? You're probably referring to Mark's comment, I think. Okay, I haven't read that yet. I'll read it in a second. But so what we want to talk about is the creative pattern, how to work with your creative pattern inside of ZBrush, and then also how to kind of work with other people in that pattern. And I'm just going to show you that in the process of mine. So there's two guys that we're going to I'm going to reference quite a bit in this. So it'd be good to check out their information. But I'm going to reference Mike DeFeo, and I'm going to reference Steve Lord. Okay, these guys represent two different ends of the spectrum of loose and controlled. I would put Steve Lord as very loose, and I would put Mike DeFeo as more controlled in terms of the demonstrations. Now, when he's sculpting his own work, I'm sure it's a little bit different. But when Mike DeFeo is sculpting for characters, he's going to do things like have the ears be a separate piece, have the nose be a separate piece, he'll have the lips be separate pieces. Everything is separated out as these individual pieces that you can then move around because the director wants the ears higher, the ears lower. And you can move those things around quite easily before you dynamesh them. So he does things in this more controlled fashion. Steve Lord does not work. If he's sculpting some dynamic figure, you know, everything comes loosely out of this box, this block, or this blobby shape even sometimes. Steve Lord is keeping so much structure and knowledge inside his head. What Steve Lord does when he works loosely requires an enormous amount of internalization of form. It's very hard for us to do that. We see somebody like Steve Lord do it. It's hard to realize how much anatomy he has studied and simplified. Mike DeFeo's approach is great for teaching, and that's kind of one of the reasons why he does it, is because you see the anatomy and form much clearer at the beginning. So I'm going to walk through that, and I'm going to be kind of going along this dichotomy of these two guys. So let's start over the simple sphere, and you're welcome to sculpt while I'm doing this. I'm hoping to get something fairly rapidly done and to explain a bit of the thinking process. So a lot of it you can listen while you sculpt, and then I'll let you know when I need your eyes on the screen really bad too. So let me check comments real quick, and then I'll get right into it. Okay, cool. So Mark's comment here, I'll just mention in the practicum about whether or not ZBrush is going in a controlled direction or not, and it's still ZBrush, which means no real-world measurements, things of that nature. Remember why there's no real-world measurements in ZBrush. Does anybody remember why? There is a reason. Why would there be no real-world measurements inside of ZBrush? That's an open question to you. Pixels. So Elizabeth is saying pixels are very intense little pieces of information. Each one maintains an order of magnitude more information than a normal pixel, which just has RGB and XY. But a pixel has depth, and it also has orientation. So it's got 4 more units of knowledge, units of information right there. But why is that relevant? So the question still is, why does ZBrush have no real-world units? Now, of course, it's taking up more memory, but the problem is, number one, it isn't 64-bit. Number two, floating point math. Floating point math is relatively new to ZBrush. The math in ZBrush prior to I think 3 was not floating point. It was limited so that earlier computers could process it faster. This is, of course, before computation of floating point, and processors just kind of blew that away. It's not. Floating point math is no longer faster or slower than, let's say, 16-bit math or anything like that. It's just not a big issue anymore. The processors are well above that. So now, imagine a 64-bit system where they're completely redoing the math, because all these libraries, like a ton of code, has to be completely rewritten for this. That's why it's taken this long. So they're 64-bit, they're rewriting all this code. Are they still going to be limited? Would they no longer have real-world units? It's a question. I'm not saying when ZBrush 5 comes along that now suddenly we have, an infinite amount of space, because there are still problems with it. But I am saying once you go to floating point, once you've gone to floating point and then, like we did in ZBrush 3, and then gone to 64-bit, everything grows. Just remember, Pixelogic is on a 5-year track. They have this thought out 5-10 years in advance. The stuff you guys are playing with right now, 90% of that was in process and being thought about when I worked at Pixelogic, some odd years ago. Panel loops, shadow box, Dynamesh being a big one, that was in the whole design and thinking process 4+ years ago. Long time. So what you see Pixelogic doing is moving into developing their controlled, or their hard surface is what I'm meaning to say. They're developing their hard surface toolkit. But they don't want to do it controlled in the same way that Maya does, because Maya was developed for engineers. No question about it. You can't debate it. It's just 15 years ago, engineers were the ones using software, not artists. But what kind of measurement does an artist need? That's what you're going to see. That's what you're going to see them playing with. All right, my little ramp. Let's get into some sculpting and some practicum. So when people start to sculpt, we have this debate, how much of the feature set do we kind of give them? So we could, for example, get people to sculpt right away, like I'm doing right now with the Move brush and Dynamesh. Let's hit no, but I'm going to undo that and drop this resolution all the way down. And then move this around, Dynamesh it, sculpt a bit of a neck. Remember, we're going for orc, pulling the jaw back. Now I got to pull this out, Dynamesh it. Okay, and eventually I'm going to get something that kind of works for me, and the student can get something that works. But the process of getting this can be very daunting sometimes, not in the technical challenges, but in the psychological challenges, because there are a lot of phases of this, especially when you see beginners start. They'll start worrying about, well, God, how do I get rid of that little bump? I didn't want that bump. Maybe I did something wrong. What did I do wrong? Oh no, I did something wrong. Now I'm screwed. And then how do I pull a shoulder out? Now I'm having to internalize in my own brain what the structure of a shoulder is. Now, you know, I know anatomy, so I can do this. I can handle it. But a beginning student isn't going to know these things. So when we are teaching ZBrush, there is not just the technological threshold that we have to be mindful of. Okay, if I show them the insert sphere brush, you know, now they need to be mindful of how that functions, and that's a new thing for me to consider. That's a technological concern, but then the other concern is the anatomical threshold, the structural threshold. How do we get them to learn structure? Not just this orc that I'm going to sculpt, but let's say you have to sculpt a tank. You know, who's sculpted a tank here? Let me do a survey, see if anybody has sculpted a tank. Or any, let's say a tank or a car or something like that. So did you just start out, Frank, by sculpting, you know, a tank from reference images, and by reference images I mean like a, you know, let's say a photo. And then what happens when you get down into trying to figure out what the tank treads look like and how the tank treads function? How are you going to understand how the treads of the tank track kind of interlock with each other? Now you're not looking at photos from the web, now you're looking at schematics. Or you're looking at photos and you're getting really detailed schematic information from them. So you have a structural threshold video that you have to go through just to learn this stuff. And then once you learn the structural you get past that structural threshold, then you can do things like design a tank tread brush, right? Which there should be one here, or if not, there's one in let's go M at Pixelogic. But there should be a tank tread brush. I thought Paul created it. If not, that would be a really cool thing for somebody to create. Or just Google it, because I'm sure it's been done. Once you've gotten past the anatomical / structure, anatomy for the for humans, structure for humans and for guns and hard surface stuff and all of that, you can kind of you can work loosely. Once you're past that structural threshold, you can work loosely. But I find this form right here, this kind of saps my soul. Like, I've been doing this for a long time, but this structure makes me think for a second, damn, Ryan, you could have pulled out a better shoulder than that, couldn't you? I mean, that's pretty crappy, you know. And so there's this, the valley of the suck that I have to walk through while this sucks. And we do an enormous amount of work psychologically and physically to kind of avoid that valley of the suck. And so what I like to do sometimes is make sure that the framework, the student, isn't forced to confront that valley of the suck right away. So that's the process I'm going to go through right now. I'm going to say, okay, first thing we're going to do is just sculpt some kind of head. Don't worry about neck or torso or anything. We're just sculpting a head. We're going to get a real small cranium. Let's go to the lowest subdivision level. Okay, I'm going to start over. My brain got lost. Lower, pull down a jaw, pull that jaw forward. Yeah, small cranium. Start to pull some kind of orbit of the eye in there. Just some kind of basic shape that works, right? So I feel comfortable with that. Now the next thing I need to do is start to add a neck. So that's when I start to introduce people into insert sphere. I'm going to delete higher. So I just had to introduce a feature to somebody, resolution levels, but that's a fairly low threshold now. Okay, and then insert sphere and a shoulder. So now we're looking at masks, but it's all happening automatic, so we don't have to really explain masks too much just yet, which is really nice. And things are structurally maintaining some soundness, so I like that. And then back here, and let's see if we can start talking about shoulder blades or shoulders. This is a real easy way for people to start to get their head around structural stuff without having to walk through the valley of the suck. And of course now we have to introduce things like, well, you know, you can invert the mask. Okay, now we need to talk about how to mask parts out. But at least now we kind of have them over some of the threshold. Really lower that brain cavity. And I want that shape. Okay, so now the next thing that we would want to do is start to figure out the nose, right? So how do we tell them to put a nose into place? Do we say just sculpt this nose? Pull this out. So this is one way we do it. We can say the nose is really tricky, so you want to kind of pull out the structural planes. That's the priority. So we're going to now pull this out. This is the way my teachers would say, you know, you need to get your front. So now I've got front plane, side plane, front of the face. Okay, and so now I've got structural elements in place that are going to kind of work really well. But that's only going to work if you're making a human nose or a nose whose structure you already understand. What if I don't really know what I'm doing? Now suddenly things get really amorphous and you're unsure. So then this is where I would say, you know, let's say play with a separate object. So we can go Wreck-It Ralph style, big bulbous nose, right? We can pull out a bit of a witch nose. You know, and this is just something anybody can start to pull out. Try it out. And there's no, there's an immediate gratification you get from this. You get to see exactly what this nose is. You're not sitting there learning or divining what is the structural planes of the nose that I have no idea I am creating yet. This is easily one of the most significant things I think in terms of teaching people the craft of sculpting. You have to teach them how to think in terms of planes, but when you get into designing, you also got to teach them how to go on the cuff to just kind of rough stuff in. So I don't want, this kind of nose. I want some crazy kind of demon nose in this guy. And what's going on there? I have no idea. Am I going to be okay with it? I don't know. That looks like a mouth and a nose. That kind of freaks me out. So I'm not ready for that yet. Okay. Smoothing it out. I'm going to push that back, and I'm going to pull the nostrils out, and I'm going to make it more like a dog nose, or really a pug-nosed dog or pig. Not having fun here. Let's try another route. Okay, there, I feel much better about that. Now let's push that in and really flatten that. Control click, I got to invert, I need to really set this back. And I need to really push these planes forward. So this is where I can talk about planes of the upper brow, right? But then don't forget, when you start talking about planes, get all the planes. Because early on, people just want to do one plane for the brow. And you'll all internally feel like something's slightly wrong. At least at certain stages of your development, you'll feel it's too simple. All that's happening is you're just missing the step down from the glabella to the supraorbital margin. Okay. I said that like it was nothing. But of course, you got to know, a little bit about that. Or just take it from me, mound, mound, mound. That's what you can use for now as you develop your structural knowledge. But now this is going to create a little bit more character that I can kind of work with. But I definitely still need a strong ridge. Control click. Okay, and then those eyes, that's too, we need those to move in quite a bit. And forward quite a bit. Let's put an ear in. And chink, chink. Real simple shapes. Remember, you can always flatten it. And while that's kind of there's a technical threshold to what I just explained, it's actually, or what I just did, it's actually set up really easily for us to explain it. It's like one of the easiest things to demo. Do we want pointy ears or tiny ears? L symmetry. L symmetry is off. At what point do we dynamesh? Am I dynameshing now, or should I dynamesh later? What is the purpose of dynamesh? Anybody want to tell me? What is the purpose of dynamesh? This is the question that gets asked the most. When do I dynamesh? At what stage is it right for me to dynamesh? And then remember, dynamesh is this kind of odd feature. It's like a toggle, but differently than, let's say, panel loops. It's not the same type of button as panel loops, and that's why they've styled it differently. So Alvaro says to integrate parts. Beru says when you run out of uniform verts. Elizabeth, to even out topology. Carlos, when you need more resolution somewhere. Norman, integrate several parts into a single piece. All of these are the correct answer, but they're all underneath another answer. The reason to Dynamesh is when you need to modify the topology of your model, of the basic shape of your model, but not really needing, animation topology. So you just have to modify the topology globally, usually in the early stages. You need to unify. You need to put more resolution somewhere. These are all symptoms, or these are all the result of needing to modify the topology in some global way. That's it. It's something you turn on and you turn off. You can Dynamesh at really high resolution levels if you have to do things like integrate subtools and do things like that. The only job it does is it just unifies everything that's visible into one mesh. Why you need to do that varies. In this particular case, Dynamesh is not meant to be a substitute for resolution levels. It's meant to be something you do in the early 10% of your mesh creation, and then you stop once you've got everything kind of positioned. So I'm not going to Dynamesh yet because I still got to figure out what this guy's jaw is doing. So now I'm going to sculpt. I'm going to start adjusting the mouth. Pretty typical orc, right? So we're going to put the lower lip, and it's always good to know your facial anatomy. Always good. You're going to have what's right here, the nodule. You're going to have your depressor anguli. What's this guy right here? Your mentalis. And then there is another set of muscles crossing here underneath that lip. And then you've got the orbicularis, oris, all of these little pieces that are happening here. Then you got your cheek, and you've got your structural elements. And then you've got the masseter happening here. You've got the risorius coming back in there. And you got a lot of this skin kind of doing weird things. And then just you're not necessarily going to need to know this, but then remember, the skin is faceted. It's bolted down to the skeleton in specific places. There are specific places where our skin is bolted via fascia to the bone itself. That's why we get bags underneath our eyes, because up here in the top, the skin is not locked to the skeleton, but then right here underneath the eye it is. So that stays locked as the rest of the stuff sags over and over and over and over, but it'll always come back to that point. When they do a facelift, I probably told you guys this already, they saw through that fascia. It's like glue, it just goes right back. Takes a little while. They saw through it, pull the face back, glue it back together, and there you go. It's crazy. I wonder who did that first facelift. That is either a very bold person or just a really crazy person. That could go wrong. Now I'm running into problems. I'm running out of topology here, but I got a ton of topology here. So I would be telling people at this stage, I'd be using this as a teaching moment to say, make your life easier. Pull from down here. because you got a ton of stuff here. And this is where you have to start being mindful of topology as not just an animator's concern, but it's a sculptor's concern as well. Let's put a cheekbone in there. And I'm leaving these polygons really rough. Okay, a few structural elements. And then I'm going to use clay buildup to kind of just blur the lines between these guys. Clay buildup is topology independent, so it doesn't care that that's actually two pieces. Remember, the trapezius or the structural element here has 1, 2, and 3 portions. Always look for these elements. If you ever get your trapezius coming up and you have what they call a descending portion of the trapezius, it's going to look weird. Ascending, descending, transversal portions. Got to have all of that. But that's just part of knowing the structure. C7. So that just takes time. Clavicle's kind of buried underneath there, so probably press Alt because everything's built around it. And then I'm going to put in a line here above the brow. Boom, boom. Does anybody know what this thing is called? Right here along the top. You see it in apes. It's a big masculine marker. Sagittal crest, as David says. Cool. So I have a combination of implied form and more specific form. This is a stopping point for me to kind of explain things. And this is relevant to when you are talking to and demonstrating sculpting to students and to yourself, to always keep in mind. So in the implied form, I, Ryan Kingsline, know what I am doing. You, the observer, will only know it if you've learned it or it's been shown to you before. And occasionally when you watch demos of guys like Glenn Villepeu or Al Gurry or any of these really awesome draftsmen, you'll see them do little lines and you're like, damn, that's the insert yada yada. And so they were implying form, and that taught you form that you needed to learn. But during that process you miss thousands of little tiny things that they do. We only catch up some of it. The implied form is form that I know, and I am just putting in a little note to myself that says, hey, that's the clavicle, Or let's say, for example, let's take the chest. I want to harp on this a little bit because it's relevant to the way in which we sculpt and also our temperament. And again, if you're just checking in, what we're doing is we're sculpting a character, which is going to be your assignment. We're going to sculpt it and get some kind of, some props and hopefully a bunch of stuff into it. But we're starting over from scratch, sculpting something to get us ready for the last week where we have to export. So we're sculpting something so we can export it next week. All right. Now, implied versus specific form. Pectoralis. In fact, let's do that a little cleaner. Shunk, shunk, and shunk. Those are the three origins of the pectoralis. That's the anatomy, right? But I'm not going to put those origins in there. That's crazy. And all of that stuff at this stage, because I already know it. It's already implied in my understanding. All of that stuff. So I'm going to imply a couple of things. I'm going to imply a little bit of a divot. In fact, let me do that in red. I'm going to imply a little bit of a divot. I'm going to imply a sternum. I'm going to imply kind of this ridge and a little bit of growth there. But then I'm going to also imply this triangle here, which is the wedge between the pectoralis and the deltoid. I'm just going to imply those right now. When we do an écorché, it's not implied. We are specifically stating it. And écorché is valuable for the exact same reason that this nose as a specific form is valuable, and it's because you learn it. You see, I put a little bit of ribs in there. And I put a little bit of that sternum's arch, and let me put it a little higher. Like that. Yeah, and there we go. And let's check our head measurements. If it was a human, the nipples would be right around there. And then underneath the nipples, we have this beautiful arch of the rib cage, and then you get all this crazy, beautiful stuff you can see in Sabin Howard's course. He talks about the eighth rib and all of this just fascinating stuff. So I've implied a bunch of form. Now, if I was to do this demo in front of people that had never sculpted before, it might seem neat, but it's incredibly inaccessible. They won't know where or why or what's happening, and they won't understand a lot of the stuff that I internally already kind of know, and I'm putting in here. That's one of the problems with a lot of DVDs, a lot of education actually, is they assume so much, and it all comes across as implied as opposed to specifically kind of stated. Okay. A lot of stuff implied in there. Some of it's implied kind of screwy. Like I don't know, there's a bunch of, there we go, that's a little better. There we go. Okay. All well and good. Let's get his chest out in front of underneath him a little bit. And those arms probably need to be massive, more massive. Okay. I don't need Dynamesh. Or actually, sorry, at this stage I do need Dynamesh. I need to decide, is this going to work for me? So remember, you can always duplicate your subtool so that you've got that one, and then Dynamesh. So now, when I'm here, you can see it maintained the form very well. This is great. So we get that question, do we want to maintain the form or do we want to simplify it? This is the debate, and one of the things that people will ask, what level of Dynamesh do I use? Everything depends on, your ultimate goal here, but when people are starting out, what I like to have them do is establish some kind of medium between a lot of polygons or a lot of detail. Or I should say a little bit of polygons, easier to manage, and a lot of detail. So this is 64, and that's different than 128. 128 maintains a lot more of that. Which one is better? Well, this is another one of those psychological things. Preacher, yeah, you can duplicate and project, but it at the low resolution I was at, it still wouldn't do it. But it bears on what I'm going to say right now, which is, which one of these is better? Which one of these do you guys think is a better one for us to start and move forward with? 128, Beirut says. One on the right. Anybody else? Come on, hazard a guess. Let me know. The 128 or the 64? Dave says keep it rough. Norman says the lower, since the feet forms are implied. Raven and Preacher are going there. But the truth is that there is no answer to that. Everybody is right. Preacher, Stefan Raven, Norman, David, and Beirut are all right. And this is where things get kind of confusing for beginners, because they're like, what should I do? Did I do something wrong? I'm so focused on what I'm doing wrong, you know, that everything is either right or wrong. It's seriously very, very easy to understand why there's no right or wrong here, but you have to put it in context. And for the only context I know is art history. So on one level you have Ingres, or you have Jean-Jacques David. And on another hand, you've got Delacroix or Rembrandt, although Rembrandt lived in both worlds. Rembrandt was also over in the other category. And more specifically, because this one is, you'll see it when I show you that, Odd Nerdrum. Look at Odd Nerdrum's later work. The form is so implied. Everything is so implied. He builds it up and destroys it. Builds it up and destroys it. Builds it up and destroys it. Like destroying it to the extent of taking sandpaper to the oil-painted canvas. Like sandpaper and a razor blade. Scraping it down. Like an abstract expressionist. You know, really destroying the canvas. Everybody's different. If you want more control, then you're going to be over here in this camp. You don't want to lose all that stuff you worked on. You want that edge that's in there because you put it in. That's cool. That's totally 100% fine. Do a resolution of 128. If you're like Whistler or Odd Nerdrum, then you're going to want it to be more implied because you're still finding the form. Doesn't really matter which one you do, just don't fight who you are, right? I mean, if you're Jean-Jacques Louis David, I mean, he's done amazing work. You know, or Bouguereau. We don't have a lot of work in progresses of Bouguereau. Or if you're one of these, the new realists, Jacob Collins' crew, there's a lot to be done in either camp. And, you know, this is just a very, how do I say it? This is a arbitrary division. Rembrandt, earlier in his life, he was a control guy. Later in his life, he got looser. Titian started controlled. He went looser. It varies. You're not one or the other, but you're going to be in one or the other mindsets. I know for a fact that I am not in the 128 category. I keep things really loose as long as possible, and that's an advantage and a massive disadvantage in a lot of ways too. So now we've got this loosely implied. We're going to leave it like it is in terms of the basic shape. Now I need to start getting something, to really hold me into the piece. I need to start to define some things. And this is a very important phase that I'm going to, I'm sure you guys are already knowing this. I'm going to emphasize with you, but if you can emphasize this with your students and the people you work with, we will do a lot to further the cause of artists. And what I'm emphasizing here is that every artist, everybody needs to get something out of this work. I mean, I'm sculpting an orc here. I need some way into this drawing, some hook that says, Ryan, you are engaged in sculpting this awesome orc that you really want to be devoting your energy to. It's not just a matter of the fact that I'm doing this for you guys and in a class. I have to have some emotional investment. How do I emotionally invest myself in this? If you look at some art interviews with artists, not art interviews, you'll hear, like, let's say, I can't remember the artist, but you'll hear an artist that say, I always kind of start with the eyes, because if I sculpt the eyes, I start to see the character, and then everything starts to come to life for me. Or there'll be some artists that say, I really just kind of like bulk in the chest, right? I really just need to see the chest to start to give me a sense of this guy's power and whatnot. There's always something different, but I'll always focus on one thing. Maybe the nose, maybe the mouth, maybe the face, maybe the body, maybe the hair. Maybe I would stop now and I would start adding all kinds of accessories to this guy to say, well, he's got some kind of, crazy hat with horns and, For me, if I was to do that, I would lose interest in this character immediately, because that kind of stuff, is so peripheral to my own needs. I am one of those guys, I need kind of the face. I just need the face. Yours going to be totally different, but whatever it is that focuses you on your model, just keep in mind, number one, it changes. Number two, don't fight that. If the face is the thing that's going to get you into the model, go for it. If you need something else, find it. Find your way into the model and help your students find their ways into the model. Because I could lose interest in this model before. I've lost interest in sculpting in front of you guys before. And it is painful when you lose interest. It's painful when you lose interest and you have to continue to teach. You can't just throw it away. So we as artists have to emotionally manage ourselves to kind of stay interested in these things, and you can't get around that, because when you lose interest, it's done. Your interest level is how this guy survives. So I'm going to go and start to focus on the face, but one of the things I know is going to happen is I'm going to start doing human faces, and I'm going to really kind of lose interest. If I start going human, I'm going to totally lose interest in front of you guys, and and then it's going to suck for both of us for the next hour. I need to do something different, or I need to keep it implied. And if it starts to get too specific, then I'm going to get myself in trouble. I'm just going to have to obliterate it. And I'm actually doing that right now. I'm getting myself in trouble right now because I'm putting an upper eyelid. It is boring as hell. Who needs an upper eyelid sculpted there? Now he looks like some kind of human with a pig nose. And I am now suddenly not liking him. So I'm going to undo all of that. I'm going to say, don't do that, Ryan. That is death. Let's see if we can kind of carve out the orbit of the eye to just do something. And maybe what we do is just a bottom lip, a bottom eyelid. And that did it for me. A lot of stuff's implied there. And that destroyed it for me. And this nose is destroying it for me. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of keep looking, and I like rough. You'll see like guys like Chet Zar, and they have just some, they can start out real loose because there's always going to be something that starts to attract them. I'm going to switch over to the standard brush. Smooth that lower lip out and inflate. Get the mentalis placed, get that depressor anguli. Get that nodule at the side of the mouth. I like to get that to overlap that lower lip. Got to keep looking for whatever's going to keep me kind of motivated. And don't be afraid to stop for hours. I was always afraid to kind of stop. I was like, well, I got to barrel through this. That's destroyed more paint, more stuff than I care to remember. How do we start working on that eye and start adding some other interesting aspects? Do we make the teeth separate? Of course, orcs have to have some crazy teeth, right? And then don't forget, you know, let's say there's, I forget what they call this now. Your teeth. They have a couple of very specific plane breaks. One of those plane breaks coming right down from the nose is where the canine teeth originate. So that's one place where we put those kind of right away, and then we can put the large teeth there. So would I sculpt those teeth in there, or do I keep them separate? How do we want to kind of do that? I'm kind of thinking I want to keep them separate, so I'm going to insert a sphere. And I'm having problems with resolution level, right? So I'm just going to delete lower. And let's go move brush. But anybody remember how I take the move brush and I turn it into a, I use it to create kind of really sharp edges. Anybody remember? There's one setting I change in the move brush. Carlos has it. Curve, AccuCurve. Instant teeth. Yay! Turn it off. Obviously that's quite large, but gouge his eyes out just eating breakfast. And then of course we can just come in and say split this. Let's isolate that. Why would it be the same group? Huh? Okay. Easy. Or actually, why don't anybody, well, I'll do it real quick. Auto group. And then split them out. Now that I've selected those, I'm going to duplicate them. And how do I invert these in the easiest way possible? That rotates probably the best. Keeping them separate. And let's just merge these down. Make life a little easier when working with them. Since they're separate pieces of geometry, their normal is not counted when I sculpt. So it's quite easy for me to do this. You might recall that we have problems with eyes when they're part of the same subtool. Carry that up towards the nose. Push that back a little bit. And now we definitely got to start finding some way to make this work even more interesting and kind of exciting for me, since I know so much about anatomy. You know, orc can be just a real simple, I mean, it can just be, what are monsters except for a cross between a human and an animal, right? Well, this is quite an ordinary combination right now. We have a pig nose, kind of a ape skull, pig teeth basically, and a little rest of it's kind of on the humanoid side. So now, you know, of course we got to make it asymmetrical, as Carlos is saying, but we'll do that later. But what do you guys think? I like what Jeremy just wrote. Like maybe we should try a little bit of the Shih Tzu. But we need something, right? Something to keep us interested. It could be that he just needs some character. You can come around by probably finally getting those eyes. And also by really making tiny eyes. Let's really start to mess with these forms. I'm moving and flattening the whole front of the face. And I haven't turned perspective on. Such a huge difference. But we can take this perspective, drop it down, because 90 we know is too high. 20 is much cleaner. Can I go back to a lower subdivision level? No, it's not letting me. Even though there was one there. I'm stuck. So a side, that looks pretty cool. It's getting much more interesting to me. Front, it's not. So side it is because of the silhouette. So this is why the creature guys always talk about silhouette. But if I was to focus on silhouette in that conversation earlier, especially with students, it kind of can take you out of the comfort zone maybe too earlier. Maybe too early, too much earlier. Too much earlier. Now I need a silhouette here. So instead of the typical shape, now I'm starting to go into a diamond. Does it make sense to do a triangle? Thick forehead. Still got that same side silhouette, but things are getting a little more interesting. I'm going to duplicate that. And it'll keep the undos, so I got this guy here to do undos if I need to later, but this guy doesn't have any undos, so now I can just move forward with him. And having said that, why don't we save? Carlos, I would agree, you know, for these teeth you need a big jaw. But what does the structure of that jaw have to be for these teeth? I don't know. Maybe Because you can see in anglerfish, you know, they've got a different way of operating. But maybe we can thin these down. And then are these even teeth? Is the debate. I don't know. But I'm not going to let anatomy start to dictate what I do when I start to feel like something is kind of working, which is totally arbitrary. Okay, and where are we at? Let's just do some final. So we focused on silhouette a little bit. Let's put some eyeballs in there. Okay, and now it's underneath here. Split, hidden. Now the eyeballs are separated. H polish. I'm going to dig a hole in there with clay buildup and then go back to H polish. Okay, and then I'm going to turn mirroring off in symmetry. Is it working these days? It's not working the same way. So I'm just going to turn symmetry off. Clay buildup. Simple, simple eyes. Symmetry's back on. Okay. So in the eye, we know that there is the eyelid that hugs the bottom of the eye. Then there is the connection from that to the orbit of the bone. And then there's always this little extra lid or area around the side. So I'm just going to sculpt this in. And that'll go all the way up. And then there's the lacrimal bone. And very boring, putting those eyelids in there. Okay, and let's start to wrap this guy up. And just back and forth. Now we need to start to take some of this implied form and texture and start to make this much more specific, because now we're in the stage where we kind of know what this guy is. Those eyes are making him look dorky. I'm unsure, so I'm going to leave that area just kind of blank for now. In this class, I'm not going to get that decided, what those end up looking like. There's a saying, Odd Nerdrum was quoting Rembrandt. The eyes and the mouth are so powerful that you have to kind of mute one to emphasize the other. This guy's mouth is quite involved here, so maybe we just completely obliterate eyes from this picture so that we can kind of design without trying to figure those eyes out. Okay, stopping point for sculpture. Now we've got a couple of things to start to consider now that we have a direction. Had a direction. That nose is troubling me. There. It's looking too much like a skull. Now it's looking like Michael Jackson. Okay. Okay. All right, let me stop there. I'm starting to lose a little interest in him, but let me check in with you guys, and then I really want to take him to another level, the next stage, basically. Hey, Joaquin, happy birthday to your grandma. Joaquin, congrats. Awesome news on the job. Okay, cool. Everybody's doing okay? Behrooz, you're mentioning specular balls for the model. I'm not sure I understood what that was referenced to, though. Do you mean in terms of the material, or? Black material. You're talking about silhouette, I think. And just kind of checking silhouette or something else? Either way, let's get this back to skin shade. Either way, it's time to take some of this and make it more specific, because till this point, everything we've done on this model now is largely implied. And so now we can start to get into a lot of trouble as we take this model and we start to turn this into actual skin texture, actual pores, actual wrinkles, actual skin hanging from him. And so I've got about a half hour. What I want to do now is start to pick some part of his skin and start to detail that, and then maybe put some fiber mesh on him, and maybe we'll put some other parts on him, some props, things of that nature that we can kind of be detailing later. But I want to get him moving forward to kind of the next stage. Preacher, well, the polygon count is only 118,000, and I'm going to finish the sculpt before I think of UVs. At least at this moment, I'm not using any texture to kind of make that stuff happen. Somehow I got man boobs a little off center. We're going to focus on the face. Okay, so I'm going to go into geometry. We're going to divide, and we are at what? Yeah. In terms of by texture, I don't mean the a texture map. I mean the actual skin detailing. That's what I want to focus on right now. And so we've got a couple of options. We can actually pull skin detailing straight from a texture map. This is a great way to get pores. Fantastic way to get pores. But then we can also sculpt manually. And that's what I really want to focus on right now. When you sculpt manually, we can use an alpha, or we just really use the brush. Everybody's kind of different in how they do it. Just using a brush is pretty old school, pretty hardcore, but it does put you in full control. Using an alpha has limitations because it's repeated and people can kind of see when you've used an alpha. So what we want to do is a combination of both. One of the first things I'm going to do is come in and get that skin brush, which I think somebody told me before had been moved to standard. No. Miscellaneous. Anybody remember where they put the skin brush? They always put it somewhere different. We're going to have to make our own here if I don't find it shortly. Patterns. Yes. Okay, remember this brush, skin brush, is using depth. That's the key thing to this brush. It uses this alpha, but it only uses a portion of the brush because it's like it's buried inside. And the type of brush is standard. But it's pretty cool because it gives some interesting texture right off the bat. And some of it is really solid pore level details. I mean, if you zoom in, it's pretty solid. So I'm just going to layer this on just to give me some context. I'm not sure if this is the right move just yet. I'm going to divide this again so that he is at, what was he at before? Only 2 million. Let's divide it one more time. Now he's at 7.5 million. Let's increase the intensity and see if we can get some larger patches. And this is really barreling in. So let's take a look at this brush Is it using trails? No. Alpha and texture. That texture is being tiled 4 times. Let's try 3 times. Let's put it back to 4. That was fine. Let's come over into stroke. I feel like the stroke is really just, it's very heavy. So I'm going to go into lazy mouse. I'm going to set my lazy step to 0.1. Actually, sorry, I'm going to set my lazy radius to 0.1. Let's see what happens with the lazy step. There we go. Now I'm able to control how much that gets built up. And so let's set ourselves here. There we go. So this is, by using lazy mouse, I'm controlling how fast this whole thing kind of builds up, which is good. Let me know if things start to slow down with you guys, with my broadcast. But I need them to be larger. So lazy step 0.01. And how do I say it? I am clever monkeying it. In fact, maybe we even switch here. Oh, it's hard with that depth to really see it. No. Back here, what would spray do? It's too strong. Let's set the smooth to 2. Okay. Looks like elephant skin, right? Can I develop a pattern or a workflow that can kind of ease this? I'm just going to hit polish by feature. What does it do? Maybe I should have saved. That can do some work. Before, after. Also, one of the things I like to show people is the smooth brush. Smooth directional. So now every time I press shift, I'll be using smooth directional, so it smooths in the direction of my stroke. So if I go in circles, it'll obliterate, but if I don't, then I'm in pretty good shape. Okay, a little early for this maybe. How many polys? 7. I'm going to go down 1. Let's start focusing on the anatomy a little bit. small, but powerful. Going up a subdivision level. It's a little harder doing it at this higher level. I think going up a level really helps it transition better. So don't be happy with just the standard brush. Really get in and start to experiment with clay buildup, with skin. And if you're doing hard surface, then experiment with blob and add some rust. And really small draw size now. Need to get rid of the symmetry there later. Okay, I'm just trying to get a little bit more done. I only have a few more minutes for this phase, which obviously shuts the brain up. How are you guys doing? Are you sculpting your own right now? Almost done. And go up. And at this point, if you want to continue working those, what I've seen a lot of guys do is come in with the inflate brush. And you start to inflate the edges of wrinkles. The intensity is really low. I'm going to go to the higher, and I'm going to try to put some skin back into this guy, some texturing. So B and S, skin at a higher level. And then I want to start getting into props, hair, various things. I need to take the brush and that alpha tile. I'm going to take it down to 1. And symmetry is off. And now let's just work on one side. I'm going to put symmetry back on. No, I've got to take it off. And now in with smooth directional. Just melt some of that back down. Okay. All right. So I've taken my guy, I have sculpted him, I've started to add some skin. This is like hours long what people do here. Not hours, these are days sometimes. This is a long time to do the stuff that I'm doing now. And I want you to get kind of far here, but we also could use some real strong, we could use some strong emphasis in a particular direction. So I'm going to use Damien's standard brush. Start to see if I can actually pull and emphasize a few things. And I would love to see you guys really kind of start to work these overlaps. It's really nice to have them already kind of set and just use Damien's standard brush to kind of this noodling part is so much of what you see is underneath. A lot of people just forget to think of that anatomy underneath. There. So now I took that kind of fairly uniform surface and now I've started to add much more of these pockets. I'm not looking at comments just yet, so I'm going to get there in just a moment. Why don't we save? Sorry, I haven't looked at the questions. I'm looking at them now. So Carlos, isn't clay or standard brush better for this? That was something you asked 11 minutes ago. I do not know what I was doing 11 minutes ago. Alvaro, is it better to define the folds after texturing the skin or the other way around? And this is actually one of the cool things to kind of demo in this. You see how I started with some kind of basic skin texturing. Is it all this undo? Oh gosh, it's all that movement. All right, let's see what happens. I started with some basic skin texturing, and then I used what brush did I use? Oh, clay tubes to kind of go back and imply more skin at a low resolution and then inflate. And then I went over the top of all of that with the damn standard brush, Damien standard brush. And now that I've got a lot more there, you can kind of see it's one the same half a dozen of the other, but you know, with Damien standard brush now going over a combination of clay tubes and skin brush, I've got a lot of stuff in there to kind of for Damien standard brush to do. Otherwise, you've got to do a lot of work with the standard brush or the Damien standard brush. A lot of work. So I kind of primed the pump, so to speak, with clay tubes and skin. Jason, I am having fun with the troll. It's been a long time since I did this. And Alvaro, yeah, you said it perfect. Have a base and then define. Or, as you know, as we're saying in this entire practicum today, work with your system. Work with the way you like to work. I don't like to kind of start out and go real slowly and methodically. Like my drawing teacher, Oliver Grimley in PAFA, he had us start with the eye and measure out from the eye and draw the entire thing from an eyeball. I was ready to take his eyeball at the end of that class. It was painful to do that. And that's not the way I work. But if I throw a bunch of stuff on there and then I start to organize it, that is the way I work. That feels fun to me. I can get into that. So I don't like to start with the Damien standard brush because it really requires you to do a lot of the work up front. Alvaro, there's so many ways to draw. You say, shouldn't you draw the skull shape first? But drawing the skull shape is an analytical figure drawing approach. He was focused on just pure 2D training your hand to behave and to know measurements. But yeah, that was a lot. That was a difficult class. But I can handle, put a bunch of stuff on there, and then make it good. All right, I want to really make that like a goblet of skin fat. Okay, we need to get into fibers and props now. Boom, boom, boom. I'm going to come in with the inflate brush and just hit spray. We're only noodling one side right now. And I'm just tapping. As I rotate, you can see it's actually kind of hurt some areas. So may or may not be wise to do this. I'm going to backtrack. Okay. Control Shift Z to redo. And undo. Cool. Okay. So we've noodled this guy. We've detailed the heck out of him. Now let's start playing with some fiber. So we've saved it, but I'm going to actually, just as a part of my production pipeline, I'm going to delete undo history, and I'm going to come into each one of these subtools and kind of do that. Okay, and then I am going to save this as orc2 cleaned. If I can spell clean. I'm saving it on another screen. So by cleaned, I know that there's no history there, and it's saved in, it's saving like in 1.2 seconds. And that's what I really want moving forward. Makes life easier. Fiber mesh? Anybody? Where do we want fibers? Okay, trying to get a little bit of sideburn action. And preview. Using the mask. Do we want to look at Lightbox and see if there's anything that we would want to do? The shaggy dog would have probably been a good one. Short and wavy. Short and curlies. Bear. BPR render that. All right, looking at questions while that renders. That's quite crappy. Actually, this looks like somebody I know. But that fiber is not going to work. Mm-hmm. Nor is that. Veins looks interesting. Let's set our S-pix down to 1 or 0. Okay. Modifiers. Length. And these veins are not responding to gravity because gravity is set to 0. 0.1. 0.01. And also their coverage, 0.8. Make them a little thicker. Let's just set it to 1. And for gravity, I'm going to set their directional variation at like 1. That twisted them up too much. Desaturate. Yeah, there's potential. So I'm going to accept those. They're going to become a separate subtool. And we're going to kind of keep moving forward. But let me check with questions. Beruz, question with UVs. If you change something, do the UVs need to be redone? Stefan answers that saying, if you make major changes to your topology, you have to redo the UVs. So I can elaborate a little further on that with this guy being kind of active here. Beru, so I'm going to answer your question right here. So imagine that you do the UVs. Your polygon is, let's say, this size and this shape. So poly and UV. And then you lay out your UVs, and your UV is the exact same shape. But then later, you take that exact same polygon face, and it's kind of stretched out into some weird shape like that. Your UV is still shaped the exact same way. So whatever's up here in this corner is really squished right into this corner. And that means that that texture is no longer going to apply correctly. If you delete the polygon, then of course the UV is deleted, and so then your map can be strange and whatnot. But the biggest issue is that is if by adjust topology you mean that polygons start to stretch and become different shapes, then as Stefan says, you got to lay out the UVs again so that it's able to kind of look at that polygon face anew. Hope that helped, and thanks, Stefan. Preacher, when poly painting, if you don't have add or subtract, does smooth act as a paint mixer? Does smooth act as a paint mixer? It was supposed to, and then what happened? We built it. Let's go into the standard brush. I'm going to say red, but only RGB. And first, let's bake white into our model. There we go. No lazy mouse, so there's red and there's blue. And then smooth, but I'm going to set the normal smooth. Oops. Make sure for smooth the add is off. Doesn't look like it's much of a blender. There was some work done on smooth, but I'm not seeing the blending in any major significant way. I am going to gloss over that. Jeremy, is there a way to isolate dynameshing and or remeshing so that you can preserve fine details on one part of a model and reduce polygons on another, like a weighting? Is there a way for Dynamesh to remesh dense areas more than others? Dynamesh there should not be, because Dynamesh is effectively unified skin, which by definition is a unified grid applied to your model. Z-Remesher does have adapt on, and adapt is supposed to kind of look for things, areas where there's a lot more density, so to speak, a lot more curvature. So your key there, excuse me, would be Z-Remesher. Decimation Master. Is it Decimation Master? Oh, it's the UVs that allow you to kind of specify density. So never mind that. Alvaro, you can mask and increase subdivs on unmasked part. Yes, that's all very true. Hey, Renato. I didn't see you say hello earlier. Alvaro, is Z-Remeshing useful, but you have to divide and yeah. You can move fibers, his beard. Carlos, so now that this has been made into a separate object, yeah, ideally. Can it be groomed? Can I come in and use a groom brush? Maybe if I select the right subtool. Let's use Groom Blower. I always love this one. See how this brush is working? It's not a lot, so I apologize. I should have made thicker hair, but I am able to blow that around quite a bit. But careful, because as soon as you start to modify the topology or you adjust it with normal brushes, it's no longer a fiber mesh. Oh, Beirut, great, okay. Yeah, collision is really an awesome feature, especially depending on the size of your model. Okay, so we've got some dude that looks he's got some quality that we like, that I like. Let me get this to some kind of, okay. And now we need to start to add parts to him and get ready for whatever it is that we're going to kind of export for later. So the obvious thing for some orc character like this is just to start to work on a helmet of sorts. So I'm going to go down in subdivision levels, and I'm going to kind of try to extract out some kind of shape. But I already know that this approach is going to have some problems. If I just come in here and I start to extract, this model is not really set up for this. It's a very loose, very rough, crappy edge, all of that kind of stuff. So this guy is not going to work. I'm going to actually duplicate him and go to the lowest subdivision level, and this guy is going to be like a temp object. I'm going to actually get rid of a good bit of topology there. So I'm just going to go, where's geometry, modify, delete hidden topology. And now what I need to do is be an edge loop. And I'm going to mask out and use this mask to kind of create something. Okay, edge loop. In fact, why don't we start with the overall shape, and then we can take that and start to build into it. That's the only one I need. Delete hidden. Does panel loop still work when it's just that? We need some thickness. Whoa. Move brush, AccuCurve, and let's see how quickly we can kind of pull something out. And you'll see quite naturally we're going to get away from that rough edge because we have AccuCurve on. Why did it do that? Oh, because of the shape. So all right, now we need more layers to this. We can't be just happy with this one layer. So I need some more temp objects. So I'm going to look at this guy, and I'm going to start to create some panels. So I'm going to polygroup this as one. And again, I'm using this as a temp. I just need him to give me one piece of form right there, let's say. And then I want a piece of form on the top. Let's say we're going to go like that. Yeah, and then I want something back here, some form, and then something there. And then I'd like also some kind of shape right there. Edge loop masked border. Okay, I want just these pieces, and I do not want the interiors. So I don't want the insides. If I go to display property double, you can see I got a top and a bottom. I don't want that. So I need to get rid of those. So I need to go polygroup, auto group, and then just boom, 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 boom. Just the pieces I want. Both sides. Invert. Boom. Geometry. Modify. Delete hidden. We're doing hard surface stuff. We're using temp objects. We're just kind of destroying what's there. And we're not being really careful about polish or bevel or any of those things because we already kind of have these options with the move brush and AccuCurve. So let's move this in, and I'm going to take this guy. I'm going to take this thing and go polygroups. Oops. Yeah, symmetry's on. Great. Auto group it so that I don't have these separate edges. Maybe these are ear flaps. I don't know. And then we can go and turn AccuCurve off. And I can just make that sit a little bit better. And we can also duplicate that. I'm going to go organic on this one. But then move, and I'm working really fast here because I'm trying to give you just a real simple example of what I would like to see you guys do. Just work fast. Okay. Getting there close. Again, for some reason I really want to pull out a line. So I'm going to try to make this a really crisp line. But I also want that to be edge looped. I want that to be a hard edge around it. So what I really want to do is edge loop masked border, and then click and pull that out. And then switch back to move brush. Hopefully AccuCurve is still on. That gives me this little bit of okay. And then we're back in here, and we've got some work to do. This is organic. So I'm going to try to focus on just the just this piece. Give it an edge. And if you were in Thomas Witzelbach's class, then you got to see that this guy, amazing artist, Thomas, worked really organically to create really just some incredibly hard surface not organic, but hard surface kind of details. It was incredible how simple it was. Okay. Divide. So you'd start out with something like this, and then you just start to refine it. You know, and even in this case where this edge is kind of, I'm unsure of, you know, you just go in and don't fight it, just outline it. And then you can kind of smooth out one side, H-polish. But leave it relatively organic in form. Because there's so much work you can do on the cleanup. Especially if you're doing orcs. I mean, they're not going to have precision manufacturing equipment, right? That's kind of outside of the world of orcdom. They don't quite have 3D printers yet. See what you can do for your own character quickly. Oops, we're at the edge of our limit. What you can do for your character quickly and without getting too bogged into details, but just hoping to get something kind of sculpted and rendered. All right. Not happy, but we kind of have to leave it right there with his fur. And the fur is not going to show up here. Show up there. All right, and we got texturing and a whole bunch of other stuff. But ultimately, what I want you guys to do is just take one bust, move this forward with some kind of cool character shape, get yourself ready for export, which is next week. Any questions right now? Thanks, Belarus. Thanks for the leads too on the environment stuff. That was really cool. Raven, it does not need to be an orc. I just did that because, well, there's no real reason. I haven't sculpted one in a long time and it sounded like fun. But I do want you to make sure you have something done that has multiple parts and it makes you ready for exporting. You know, I don't know if we're going to use Keyshot or Unity or Maya or what, but we're going to want to export it for later, for next week. And that's our last week. But then don't forget, you have free upgrades. Okay, it always confuses people later on. But I'm sure that this is going to become a standard for all companies that do online stuff. There is no reason for you to have to pay for a class a second time. It's just, there's no reason. The only reason you would do that at a school like USC is because they have only so many people they can fit into a classroom. So they're paying rent. I don't, it doesn't cost anything extra to have you guys here. Well, the systems has some limitations. Like 500, over 500, we get in trouble. But we're not there yet. Anyways, a new version of ZBrush is coming, so another certificate program's coming once I get my head around it and we get the team in place. We're going to be doing this all over again. And you will be able to enroll in that. Have fun, and tomorrow I'll probably be there at the summit. So I'll be there tomorrow morning for Danny's. That's about the only time I was able to pull away. And Gabriel, about the last test, we're going to have because Nate's in transit right now, we're going to have probably about an extra week on that. So we'll do it after the last class. All right. Have fun. Thanks for everything. I'll get this up as soon as possible. See you, Adam, Gabriel, Preacher, Raven. See you, Laszlo, Jeremy. See you later, Alvaro. All right. Ciao, ciao. I'm going to stop this now and get this recording. Thanks so much, Van, for pushing all the comments through. It made a big difference while I was while I was going into Artist Brain. Thanks, Frederick, Jesus, Carlos. All right. Okay, Van, I will use my recording and I'll just update it. So just keep yours for later, and if we need it, I'll tell you.
All right, sounds good.
All right, thanks. Take care, guys. Ending webinar now.